The certified letter showed up on a Tuesday morning, demanding I pay $47,000 in fines for living in a home I'd owned for over 12 years. The twist? I wasn't even part of their HOA. I'm in my kitchen, coffee steaming in hand, staring at a stack of legal documents that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphs. Outside the window stood Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood and president of the HOA, pointing at my house like she was directing a military strike. Her lawn glittered with morning dew, the kind that's probably measured with a ruler to make sure it's within regulation height. My response: I took another sip of coffee and thought, lady, you just picked the wrong guy. So tell me, what would you do if someone tried forcing you into an HOA you never joined? Share your craziest HOA story in the comments. I bet mine still wins. But before we dive into this legal circus, where's everyone tuning in from? I'm curious how many of you are fighting your own neighborhood dictators right now. I'm Garrett Mitchell, and 12 years ago, I thought I was buying my piece of the American dream. Instead, I stumbled straight into a nightmare built by a woman who makes dictators look level-headed. Back in 2011, fresh out of the army after 2 tours in Afghanistan, I used my VA loan to buy 2.3 acres of unfiltered freedom. The place came with a 1970s ranch house sitting on what used to be the Hendricks family farm back when this whole area was just cow pastures and common sense. Between my property and the upscale Willowbrook Estates development runs Willow Creek, a gentle reminder that some boundaries are drawn by nature, not lawyers. I make my living as an independent contractor, electrical work, plumbing. Whatever keeps food on the table for me and my 16-year-old daughter, Emma, after my divorce. This land became our sanctuary. I built a small workshop out back, where the scent of pine shavings and WD-40 fills the air. Every morning, I breathe in the crisp, chemical-free air you'll never find in manicured subdivisions. Emma loves it here: space to run, a creek for catching tadpoles, and a dad who's finally home instead of overseas. Then came Karen Whitmore, the living embodiment of an whole nightmare. At 52, she drives a spotless white Lexus that's never touched a dirt road, ruling her $800,000 McMansion like Marie Antoinette with a clipboard. After 6 years as HOA president, she's become a suburban surveillance expert, memorizing every neighbor's trash day and lawn height. And her husband, Brad, he's not just some bystander, he's the county's planning commissioner. Keep that detail in mind. It becomes very important later. Our first face-to-face encounter happened on a Tuesday morning at the mailbox. Karen crossed the street like a general marching into battle, pearls on, clipboard in hand, indignation radiating off her. The crunch of gravel under her designer heels sounded like incoming fire. Your workshop violates neighborhood standards, she said, skipping right past introductions. I looked at her, then at my property, then back at hers across the creek. Ma'am, I replied, I'm not part of your HOA. Her smile could have frozen lava. We'll see about that. That was 1.5 years ago. What followed was a masterclass in suburban psychological warfare. Karen started tracking my schedule down to the minute, snapping photos of anyone who visited, like she was building an FBI case file. Whenever I fired up a power tool, I'd catch her peering through her window, arms folded, disapproval practically radiating across the 47 feet of creek that divided us. She even bought binoculars. But what finally pushed her over the edge was Emma's 16th birthday party. It wasn't wild, just a simple backyard barbecue with music until 9:30 p.m., totally within county noise limits. Karen called the cops twice. Both times, the officers found nothing wrong and left shaking their heads. One even stayed for a burger, laughing that it was the calmest disturbance he'd handled all week. The next morning, everything changed. Emma found a violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper, heavy, official-looking legal paper that screamed intimidation. It listed my workshop, garden fence, and gravel driveway as unauthorized modifications, each carrying a $500 fine. Dad, Emma said, examining the letter like it might explode, this woman's lost her mind. She wasn't wrong. Here's what Karen was counting on: then I'd crumble like every other working-class homeowner she'd bullied into submission, pay the fines, stay quiet, and obey her imaginary rules. She'd perfected intimidation tactics but failed one basic step: Research. Because if she'd checked the county records, she would have discovered something that could have saved us all 18 months of chaos. My property was never part of her HOA. In fact, it had been deliberately excluded for reasons that would eventually bring her entire empire crashing down. But narcissists don't research. They don't negotiate. They attack. I refilled my coffee, walked out to the fence line, and stared across Willow Creek at Karen's pristine home. Immaculate lawn, flawless paint, and a foundation built on pure arrogance. "Lady," I muttered into the morning air, "you just picked a fight with the wrong veteran." The creek babbled quietly, unconcerned with the human nonsense on either side, a perfect metaphor for how I should have felt about what was coming next. 3 days after Emma's birthday party, Karen fired her first shot with the precision of a suburban missile strike. A certified letter arrived because nothing screams official harassment like being forced to sign for it. This wasn't some messy handwritten complaint. It was a glossy, full-color violation notice that probably cost more to print than my monthly electric bill. The paper had that slick, expensive texture lawyers love designed to make absurdity look legitimate. The list of offenses read like a homeowner's nightmare. Unauthorized exterior modifications, unapproved workshop structure, non-compliant fence materials, illegal gravel driveway surface, and failure to maintain landscaping consistency with community standards. Each violation came with a $500 fine and a 30-day deadline before further enforcement, which included liens and possible legal action. I had to hand it to Karen. Her dedication to bureaucratic intimidation was almost impressive. Too bad she'd missed one critical fact. My first move was straight to the county courthouse, a building that smelled of old paper, dust, and decades of human conflict. The clerk, Dorothy, a calm woman who'd clearly seen every property feud under the sun, helped me dig up my original 1970 deed. Back in Afghanistan, our intel officer used to say, "Always verify your primary sources, secondary ones lie." Turns out, that advice works just as well for land disputes as it does for avoiding IEDs. Sure enough, the deed confirmed everything. My land's boundaries were surveyed and recorded 40 years before Willowbrook Estates even existed. The measurements left no doubt. I was 47 feet outside their jurisdiction, separated by Willow Creek and protected by natural boundary law. Just to be sure, I called the whole management company. After being put on hold 3 times, the receptionist finally admitted she couldn't find my address in their system. "Sir," she said flatly, "if you're not in our database, you're not in our HOA." It felt like common sense to me, but apparently not to Karen. 2 days later, she arrived on my doorstep with backup, her brother-in-law Rick, a self-proclaimed surveyor whose main qualifications seemed to be owning an orange vest and a tape measure. The smell of Rick's cheap cologne mixed with Karen's perfume and desperation as they stood on my porch, trying their best to look official. They started rambling about creek migration and updated boundary assessments. That was Karen's first real tactical blunder. She insisted the creek had shifted over time and demanded access to reestablish the proper property lines. I held up my county-certified survey and said, "Ma'am, water doesn't move property lines. That's not how the law works." Her face went crimson. "We'll see what my attorney says about that," she snapped. And right there she made her fatal mistake. Karen revealed she was lawyering up before she'd done her homework. While she was busy pretending to be the property police, I uncovered something far more explosive. My 83-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived here since the land was still grazing pasture, invited me over for coffee and some conversation that turned out to be pure gold. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and quiet justice. "Funny thing," she said, stirring her sugar with the kind of patience only time can teach. "The original subdivision plans clearly excluded your parcel. Said it was in the creek's flood zone, environmental reasons. They called it." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But Brad, Karen's husband, he pushed the approval through anyway. His construction company got the contract for more than half of those houses. And just like that, everything clicked into place." My old military instincts flared up. When your enemy shows a pattern, you exploit it. A week later, another violation letter landed in my mailbox. This one accused me of creating a nuisance affecting community property values. Karen had escalated from fines to threats, talking about liens and foreclosure like she was running a courtroom. She'd even hired Pembroke and Associates, one of those billboard law firms that bill by the intimidation factor. But her campaign of fear had the opposite effect. It sparked resistance. At the grocery store, the Kowalski family approached me in the produce aisle, whispering like we were plotting an uprising. They'd been forced to tear down their kid's swing set for violating aesthetic guidelines. That's when I realized Karen hadn't just declared war on me. She'd declared war on her entire neighborhood. $8,000, Mrs. Kowalski whispered. That's how much we had to spend just to satisfy Karen's little suburban dictatorship, she said. If we didn't comply, she'd take us to court. We couldn't afford to fight it. Mrs. Patterson added another piece to the puzzle: the Rodriguez family, who'd eventually packed up and left town after Karen took her harassment so far that she even called their employer. The pattern was becoming crystal clear. Karen went after hardworking families who couldn't afford drawn-out legal battles, while conveniently ignoring the same violations when it came to her wealthier friends. The irony was almost poetic. While Karen wasted thousands on lawyers and glossy violation notices, she was unknowingly building my defense file. Every letter, every phone call, every threat, all of it was quietly documented. Willow Creek still flowed peacefully between our properties, marking a natural boundary that no amount of paperwork or legal bluffing could erase. Karen thought she was waging a property dispute. She didn't realize she'd just handed me everything I needed to dismantle her entire operation. 2 weeks after my courthouse visit, her next move landed in my mailbox, subtle as a hammer wrapped in legal stationery. A thick envelope from Pembroke and Associates, a law firm that practically used intimidation. Inside was a 4-page cease and desist letter, a theatrical masterpiece of legal jargon and arrogance. It demanded that I immediately cease all unauthorized activities and submit to HOA jurisdiction. Then came the truly absurd part. They claimed my property was a continuing nuisance, lowering HOA own values, and demanded that I grant them access to install boundary markers on my land. The irony was staggering. She wanted permission to trespass so she could prove I was trespassing. I'd seen this tactic before. In the Army, we called it escalation through paperwork. When someone can't win on facts, they drown you in official-looking nonsense until you give up from exhaustion. But I wasn't about to surrender. My response was quick and calculated. I contacted Jonna Reeves, a local attorney known for defending veterans and dismantling bullies for sport. The moment she finished reading Karen's letter, she actually laughed, the kind of genuine laugh you don't expect from a lawyer surrounded by legal briefs and oak bookshelves. "Garrett," she said, the room smelling faintly of leather and determination, "this woman just handed us a harassment case gift-wrapped." Jonna drafted a counter cease and desist that was pure legal poetry, concise, precise, and devastating. 3 paragraphs citing property rights statutes, harassment laws, and a clear warning: any further contact would result in immediate legal action. She even added a polite reminder that demanding access to private land without legal grounds qualifies as attempted trespass. Karen's reaction was exactly what I expected: unhinged and theatrical. Within days, she called an emergency whole meeting to discuss the so-called boundary dispute crisis. The community center buzzed with tension as Karen delivered her sermon on protecting property values, complete with color charts showing how my illegal business was supposedly tanking everyone's home equity. It stung a little because technically, she wasn't wrong that I used my workshop for side jobs. But what she didn't understand is that home-based businesses are perfectly legal when they're licensed to and zoned properly. My electrical contractor's license was valid, my insurance was current, and my property was zoned for exactly that kind of work. Of course, facts have never been much of an obstacle for a gossip campaign. Karen's whisper network went into overdrive. Soon, my neighbors were getting concerned citizen updates warning them about the licensed contractor operating next door. She'd turned neighborhood rumor into a weapon aimed squarely at isolating me from anyone who might support me. Her pressure campaign hit its peak when county code enforcement showed up at my door. Responding to multiple anonymous complaints about zoning violations, the inspector, a tired man named Phillips who looked like he'd seen this song and dance 100 times, spent half an hour walking through my property. When he finished, he shut his clipboard and said quietly, "Off the record, whoever's filing these complaints is wasting everyone's time. Your setup is cleaner than most commercial shops I inspect," the county inspector said, closing his clipboard with a nod of approval. But Karen wasn't done with her neighborhood espionage. My security cameras installed right after that first violation notice soon captured something unbelievable. There was Rick, her brother-in-law, sneaking around my property at sunrise, planting orange survey stakes like he was setting up a military operation. The footage showed him carefully measuring distances, then deliberately placing markers to make it look like my workshop crossed into HOA land. When I confronted him later, Rick mumbled something about preliminary measurements and bolted like a teenager caught spray painting a wall. The smell of his nervous sweat lingered in the air long after his truck sped away. Meanwhile, Emma started feeling uneasy walking to her school bus. Teenagers have a sixth sense for adult chaos, and she'd noticed that Karen's morning drives somehow always lined up with her schedule. One morning, Emma spotted Karen parked near the creek bridge, camera in hand, zooming in on our house through a telephoto lens like some wannabe paparazzo. "Dad, this is getting seriously creepy," she said over breakfast, her voice sharp with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you're being watched in your own home. That's when I knew Karen had officially crossed the line from petty harassment into intimidation. My old platoon sergeant used to say, "Document everything. Crazy people eventually hang themselves if you give them enough rope." And that's exactly what Karen was doing, tying her own legal noose. One paranoid stunt at a time, the neighborhood Facebook group, Willowbrook Neighbors, exploded into chaos. Karen's loyalists flooded the page with posts about protecting property values, while an increasing number of residents began sharing their own HOA horror stories. The comment threads read like a suburban civil war fought entirely in emojis and passive-aggressive phrasing. Then came the bombshell. Mrs. Patterson, ever the calm witness to decades of neighborhood nonsense, quietly mentioned over tea that she'd been recording Karen's whole meetings for years just in case anyone ever needed proof of who she really was. "Honey," she said, pouring tea with the steady hands of someone who'd seen it all, "I've got recordings that would curl your hair." That's when it hit me. Karen hadn't just picked a fight with me, she'd accidentally declared war on the collective memory of every neighbor she'd ever bullied. And through it all, Willow Creek kept flowing, oblivious to human foolishness, as Karen continued building her own downfall one paranoid move at a time. Then came her nuclear option. It was a Thursday morning like any other until a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, papers in hand. I was being served a $47,000 lawsuit. The complaint read like a fever dream written by someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas. Karen wasn't just demanding back fines anymore. She claimed I had automatically joined the HOA simply by owning property within 5 meters of her subdivision. The suit demanded that I follow all HOA rules, stop any future modifications, and pay enough in legal fees to buy a used car. Sitting in Jeanette's office later that morning, sunlight pouring through the windows that had probably seen 100 property disputes, I watched my attorney's professional calm turn into visible outrage. "Garrett," she said, flipping through the pages of Karen's so-called complaint, "this woman is either completely detached from reality or pulling off the most expensive bluff in county history." But Jeanette's investigation soon uncovered something darker than delusion. Court records revealed Karen had filed 6 similar boundary lawsuits over the past decade. 3 families had eventually moved away under the crushing cost of litigation. The Rodriguez family, the ones Mrs. Patterson had mentioned, had even lost their home after drowning in legal fees. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance, she was a calculated predator. Her pattern was chillingly consistent: target hardworking families who couldn't afford to fight, fabricate violations, escalate legal threats, and force them out. Meanwhile, her affluent friends with identical violations were mysteriously left alone. As I tried to process the scale of what she'd done, Karen escalated again, this time into the media. With the coordination of a political campaign, she started calling local news outlets about a property value crisis threatening responsible homeowners. She even staged photo ops, posing dramatically near my workshop while pretending to protect community standards. Channel 7 ran the story under the headline, "HOA Battle Divides Neighborhood." There she was, Karen in her signature pearls, lamenting on camera about how one man's refusal to follow rules was lowering property values for honest families. They never interviewed me, of course. Karen had told the station I was unavailable for comment, which was funny, considering no one had even tried to contact me, but her PR stunt backfired in spectacular fashion. Emma's friend Madison, the Kowalski family's daughter, became our secret informant during sleepovers that doubled as covert resistance meetings. Thanks to her intricate teenage social network impressive enough to rival a CIA field team, I learned that Karen had been promising neighbors reduced HOA fees if they backed her lawsuit. Then came an even bigger bombshell. Madison overheard Karen boasting at her book club about finally finding a way to get rid of that contractor and his obnoxious workshop. Madison, pretending to be absorbed in homework, managed to record the entire exchange on her phone. The audio made one thing crystal clear: Karen's crusade wasn't about protecting property values. It was fueled by pure spite. After that, the harassment campaign crossed the line from legal maneuvering into outright sabotage. Someone scattered roofing nails across my driveway, puncturing the tires on my work truck. As I crouched beside the vehicle, pulling twisted bits of metal from the rubber, the air reeked of burned tires and betrayal. Not long after, Emma's car was vandalized in the school parking lot. Long, deliberate scratches spelling out the word "move" across her driver's door. Watching my 16-year-old daughter fight back tears while inspecting the damage ignited something fierce inside me. I was done playing defense. Then came the smear campaign. Anonymous flyers began circulating through the neighborhood, grainy photos of my workshop plastered with warnings about unlicensed electrical work endangering your family's safety. They even listed my business phone number, urging people to report me to the state licensing board. The investigation, of course, found nothing because there was nothing to find, but the damage was already spreading. A few of my longtime clients received anonymous tips warning them to avoid hiring unlicensed contractors. Within a month, my business revenue had dropped nearly 30% as nervous customers chose to steer clear of the drama. One night, I looked across the creek and saw Karen sitting in her car with binoculars, meticulously logging my work hours like she was conducting a military operation. When our eyes met through the lenses, she didn't flinch or look away. She simply jotted something on her clipboard and drove off. It was a psychological siege designed to make me crack, but Karen had made one fatal miscalculation. She was waging a mind game against someone who'd already survived real combat. Compared to dodging mortars in Afghanistan, suburban paranoia was amateur theater. That's when Jeanette's research uncovered the real bombshell, the piece of evidence that would unravel everything. Buried in the original 2009 county planning documents was a clause explicitly stating that my property was to be excluded from the subdivision because it sat within the creek's flood zone. The attached environmental impact report one Karen's husband, Brad, would have seen as the county's planning commissioner clearly recommended my land remain separate for ecological preservation. Karen and Brad had known all along that my parcel was intentionally excluded, yet they'd spent the past 18 months pretending otherwise. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a calculated conspiracy, fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority dressed up as suburban civility. Meanwhile, the creek kept flowing, quietly eroding Karen's credibility one lie at a time. But her downfall wasn't complete yet. The final turning point came from an unexpected place: a dusty filing cabinet in the basement of the county courthouse, smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten justice. Sarah, Jeanette's relentless paralegal, treated legal research like an archaeological dig. While sifting through old environmental reports from 2009, she struck gold. The document she found, titled Willowbrook Estates Environmental Assessment, read like a prophecy of Karen's collapse. It specifically stated that parcel 47B, the Hendricks homestead, was to be permanently excluded from the subdivision due to flood zone and environmental compliance. Requirements. Then came the chilling part, a handwritten note beside the engineer's signature that read, Commissioner Whitmore advised of flood zone concerns exclusion mandatory for AP compliance. Brad Whitmore, Karen's husband, hadn't just known about my property's exclusion. He had been formally warned that including it would violate federal law. Jonna spread the documents across her conference table like puzzle pieces forming the outline of a conspiracy. Garrett, she said, her voice tight with disbelief, this gets worse. Look at the HOA Incorporation papers. There, among the signatures, was one that made my stomach drop. Robert Riss, previous owner of parcel for 7B. The problem? Robert Riss had been dead for 6 months when that document was allegedly notarized. Handwriting analysis later confirmed what we already suspected. Someone had forged a dead man's signature to illegally rope my property into an HOA that was never supposed to include it, but Sarah wasn't done. When she cross-referenced Karen's financial records with county property data, the motive became crystal clear. Karen's immaculate McMansion was drowning in debt-free, refinanced mortgages based on inflated property appraisals. Her survival depended on keeping neighborhood values artificially high. She has been using HOA intimidation to prop up her home equity, Jonna explained, showing me a graph comparing Willowbrook's housing prices to nearby areas. Every time she forced a family to renovate, relocate, or refinance, she kept her own market value afloat. The lawsuit had never been about community standards. It was about Karen's financial desperation. And Mrs. Patterson's collection of recorded HOA meetings provided the final nail in the coffin. Her ancient cassette tapes had captured Karen in private board discussions, openly admitting what she'd never say in public. The most damning recording dated March 2022. That contractor's property technically isn't under our jurisdiction, Karen's voice said, sharp and smug, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers. We just keep the pressure on until he either gives in or moves out. Another gem surfaced from June 2022, Brad saying, we can't legally force him to join. But what's he going to do? Hire a lawyer. People like that always fold when you bury them in paperwork. It was now obvious, Karen had been running a protection racket dressed up as an HOA, singling out families she believed couldn't fight back. But the most bone-chilling recording dated from August 2022, right after Emma's birthday party. Karen's voice, captured for a full 23 minutes, hissed through the speaker, I've finally figured out how to get rid of that veteran and his noisy workshop. We'll crush him under legal fees until he breaks. That damning audio, recorded by a sweet elderly neighbor who pretended to nap through meetings while documenting every word, laid the entire scheme bare. The real coup de grace, though, was discovering that Brad's construction company had built 60% of Willowbrook estates. Those homes had been sold at inflated prices because buyers were told they were moving into a legally established HOA with strict property standards. Every sale was potentially fraudulent. Every HOA fee collected amounted to theft. Every fine issued was extortion. Karen and Brad hadn't simply harassed me, they had defrauded an entire neighborhood for over a decade. Sitting in Jonette's office, surrounded by evidence of organized fraud, I realized just how exposed Karen really was. This was no longer a property dispute. It was a full-blown criminal conspiracy with the potential to collapse their entire financial empire. The question wasn't whether I could win, it was whether I wanted to obliterate their world completely or settle for simple justice. Emma's keyed car and our family's 18 months of harassment answered that for me, Karen had declared war on the wrong veteran. Now she was about to see what total victory actually looked like. We convened our work council in my workshop on a Saturday morning, steeped in the smell of coffee, sawdust, and righteous determination. Jonna spread legal documents across my workbench like a general laying out battle plans. Mrs. Patterson arrived with a thermos of coffee strong enough to power a legal revolution. The Kowalskis joined us, and the Rodriguezes logged in from their new city. An army of Karen's victims, finally ready to strike back. Emma sat at the end of the table with her laptop, typing notes as if she were documenting the most important school project of her life. Watching my 16-year-old daughter compile evidence of adult corruption filled me with equal parts pride and heartbreak. Here's our strategy, John announced, aligning documents with military precision. First, we file a motion to dismiss Karen's lawsuit based on fraudulent HOA incorporation. At the same time, we launch a counterclaim for harassment, business interference, and conspiracy. Then we request an emergency injunction freezing HOA fee collection until we prove their entire legal foundation is built on lies. Mrs. Patterson's cassette recordings were transcribed and authenticated by a court stenographer who had heard every type of confession imaginable but admitted Karen's casual discussions of targeting working families were uniquely disturbing. The audio quality was shockingly good. Apparently Mrs. Patterson's ancient recorder picked up voices better than modern digital devices. Building the case felt like preparing a RICO file against organized crime. County planning documents were stacked chronologically to expose Brad's systematic abuse of power. Financial records laid out his conflicts of interest. My security cameras supplied 18 months of footage showing harassment, boundary manipulation, and attempted intimidation. The clip of Rick planting fake survey stakes was especially damning, clear evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Sarah Morgan, our covert teenage sleepover operative, had also captured Karen's book club confessions about getting rid of that contractor. Madison's recordings transformed what had once looked like petty harassment into proof of premeditated criminal conspiracy. "Dad," Emma said, glancing up from her notes. She basically confessed to everything on tape. "How dumb can you be?" "Not dumb," Mrs. Patterson corrected, stirring sugar into her coffee with the patience of someone who had outlasted 3 neighborhood tyrants. "Arrogant. She thought she was untouchable because nobody ever fought back." Our media strategy centered on investigative journalist Sarah Morgan, who specialized in uncovering municipal corruption and had already been following HOA fraud cases across the state. Jonna began drafting a press release that didn't just document my harassment, but also highlighted the broader pattern years of targeting working families with coordinated legal and financial pressure. We brought in technical experts to translate Karen's crimes into clear, undeniable terms judges and juries could understand. A professional surveyor verified the original boundary markers, and an environmental engineer confirmed the 2009 flood zone assessment Brad had ignored. The handwriting analyst's report on the incorporation paperwork was brutal. The signature attributed to Robert H. Ricks showed clear signs of being copied from a sample, not written naturally. And the notarization date post-dated his death by 6 months. Forgery was the only plausible conclusion. Financial auditors uncovered a pattern of HOA funds quietly funneled into paying for Karen's legal attacks on individual homeowners. In short, residents were unknowingly financing the very harassment aimed at them through mandatory dues. Behind the scenes, Madison reported rising panic at the Whitmore residence. Brad had been seen shredding documents in his garage. Photos captured by alert neighbors finally convinced people that their HOA president might be criminal. Karen was scrambling for loans to cover mounting legal bills, and the management company was seriously considering dropping Willowbrook as a client. We answered with low-key psychological operations that were surprisingly effective. I openly prepared for a major expansion of my workshop, ordering lumber, concrete, and electrical supplies in quantities that signaled a permanent, large-scale build. All permits were lawful and properly filed. But Karen's visible blood pressure spikes during her surveillance drives told me the bluff was working. Support arrived from unlikely places. The electricians' union offered financial assistance for our harassment suit. Veterans groups donated to our legal fund after learning military families were being targeted. Environmental advocates became interested in the creek preservation angle, and 3 current HOA board members privately agreed they'd testify against Karen. The most valuable intel, though, came from HOA transparency laws Karen had been violating for years. Most homeowners didn't realize they could demand to inspect financial records, review meeting minutes, or challenge assessments under state sunshine statutes. Here's what Karen never grasped, Janice said as she mapped our legal assault. HOA boards are required to disclose full financial records to homeowners. Every hidden assessment, legal invoice, and consultant contract is public information that members can demand. By Sunday night, the workshop looked like a command center. Boxes of evidence lined the walls, expert witnesses were scheduled, and the media plan was ready to roll. Emma, having researched similar cases nationwide, looked up from her laptop. Dad, she isn't just going to lose this lawsuit, she's going to jail, right? Outside, the creek kept bubbling toward Karen's house, as if approving the slow unspooling of her empire. War was coming to Willowbrook Estates, and Karen had supplied virtually all the ammunition. Her desperation peaked when she came to my door one Tuesday evening smelling of cheap perfume and panic. "Let's be reasonable adults about this," she said, clutching a folder like it contained the secrets of civility. "I'll settle this for $15,000. A fair resolution." Karen, the same woman who demanded $47,000 in fabricated fines, now stood on my porch in a designer blazer, offering a settlement that would still cost me more than my truck was worth. I leaned in the doorframe with the calm of someone holding all the cards. "I don't negotiate with extortionists," I told her. Her smile cracked. "You'll regret this, Mr. Mitchell," she warned. That marked the start of her most vindictive phase. Within days, anonymous social media posts began spreading rumors about my military service, suggesting I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD and a risk to neighborhood children. The lie hit hard, not because it was believable to those who knew me, but because it weaponized prejudice and aimed to isolate Emma and me. Karen gambled that fear would trump facts. Then the sabotage escalated into true danger. Someone severed my workshop's main power line with bolt cutters. The dangling cable and acrid smell of burnt insulation could have sparked a fire if I hadn't discovered it. My cameras caught a shadowy figure moving at 3:00 a.m., cutting the line and fleeing toward the creek, the footage too grainy for a positive ID but perfectly timed after I'd refused her settlement offer. 2 days later, Emma found nails scattered across the driveway in a pattern meant to puncture tires, concentrated near the garage where we'd normally drive. The deliberate placement turned vandalism into a calculated attack on our daily life. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma said as we swept metal fragments from the asphalt. "What if she goes further?" I decided to move Emma temporarily to Mrs. Patterson's for her safety. Watching my daughter pack a bag because of neighborhood terror filled me with a rage that made deployments in Afghanistan feel, for a moment, almost peaceful by comparison. County Building Inspector Phillips appeared once again for what he called a routine safety inspection, the third one in just 2 months. The exhaustion on his face said it all. He already knew exactly who was behind these fake complaints. Mitchell, he greeted, clipboard ready but voice tinged with sympathy. "At this point, I've inspected your property more often than some commercial complexes. Everything's perfect, as always. Whoever keeps calling these in is wasting public resources." But Karen's campaign of harassment reached far beyond anonymous calls. Several of my steady contracting clients began receiving concerned citizen phone messages warning them not to hire me. Supposedly an unlicensed contractor under investigation, the callers even referenced specific job sites and fabricated safety violations. All delivered in a tone so professional it almost sounded official. Within weeks, my income had dropped by 40%. As jittery customers decided to avoid potential trouble, Karen was dismantling my livelihood piece by piece, hiding behind layers of false identities and cowardly insinuations. Then the psychological warfare escalated to surveillance. One afternoon, I caught her parked across the creek, equipped with binoculars, a telephoto lens, and a notebook. Like some suburban spy conducting fieldwork, when I raised my camera and waved from the fence line, she didn't retreat. Instead, she snapped photos of me photographing her. Brad, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. Neighbors reported seeing him burning stacks of papers in his backyard fire pit. The air thick with the acrid smell of panic and secrets turning to ash. The county's ethics board was closing in on his conflict of interest violations. And the same neighbors who once helped him torment others were now documenting his every frantic move. Emma's friend Madison kept us updated from inside the chaos. According to her reports, Karen's house had turned into a battleground, shouting matches with Brad, late-night visits from expensive lawyers, and phone calls ending with her screaming about betrayal and conspiracy. Madison says Karen's been crying a lot, Emma told me during one of our nightly talks. She keeps saying everyone's ganging up on her. The irony was poetic. Every act of desperation Karen committed became fresh evidence for our case. Each anonymous threat, each piece of business interference, every attempt at intimidation was being catalogued for the legal reckoning that now loomed like a rising flood. Still, her worst moment hadn't arrived yet. Desperation makes people reckless, and Karen was running out of both options and money. The creek outside seemed to carry a quiet message toward her house, the scent of justice she refused to recognize. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others dig deeper until they bury themselves completely. Karen belonged firmly in the latter group. The County Planning Commission's public hearing, the one that would decide the fate of Karen's suburban empire, was set for a Thursday night. She arrived early, turning the bland municipal conference room into her personal command center. She'd hired a presentation coach, borrowed money for dramatic visual flair, and dressed in an expensive suit that screamed, "Model citizen under siege." Her slideshow was a polished piece of propaganda, color-coded graphs showing alleged drops in property value, professional photos of my workshop framed to look like an industrial blight, and testimonials from 3 neighbors clearly bribed with promises of lower HOA fees. Karen had officially turned harassment into performance art. Emma and Madison sat in the back, recording every second like war correspondents chronicling a historic battle. Mrs. Patterson coordinated witnesses' families Karen had tormented, while Jeanne prepared the legal rebuttals. Sarah Morgan, the investigative reporter, arrived with a photographer in tow, ensuring the spectacle would be immortalized in the next day's headlines. The tension in the room was thick with sweat and fear as Karen realized her once private crusade was about to explode in public view. Her opening act was pure melodrama, trembling voice, tearful claims about protecting family neighborhoods, and theatrical gestures toward her inflated charts of collapsing home values. "This illegal business operation," she proclaimed, pointing to enlarged photos of my workshop, "endangers our children and destroys the standards that protect our property investments." A few audience members nodded until the county engineer stood and calmly diffused her entire narrative with one question. "Ma'am," he said, flipping through her survey data, "according to your own measurements, this property extends 30 feet into Willow Creek. Are you suggesting the creek moved?" The silence was immediate and priceless. Karen's consultant fumbled for words, mumbling something about natural boundary shifts as her polished presentation began to unravel before everyone's eyes, as the professional surveyor seated in the audience visibly flinched. The absurdity of Karen's claims became clear to everyone except Karen herself. She clung to her delusions, spinning increasingly far-fetched theories about shifting boundaries and misunderstood maps. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my composure. No anger, no theatrics, just straightforward facts delivered with the precision of a field report. The original 1970 property deed, a certified survey confirming a 47-foot gap between my workshop and any HOA-controlled land, an environmental study proving that the property had been intentionally excluded for flood zone protection. Then came the first blow of Mrs. Patterson's recordings. The old cassette player crackled, filling the room with Karen's unmistakable voice from March 2022. "That contractor's property technically isn't under our jurisdiction, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers." Karen's face drained of color as her own words echoed through the chamber. And before she could recover, the tape rolled on. "We just keep the pressure up until he gives in or moves away. It's worked on 3 other families already." The silence that followed was deafening, until the handwriting expert took the stand. His testimony was surgical in its precision. Projected across the wall were enlarged images of the forged signature of Robert Hendricks, a signature dated 6 months after the man's death. Even to untrained eyes, the irregular pen pressure, the tremors in the line, and the hesitation marks were undeniable. The writer was imitating from a sample rather than writing freely, the expert explained, laser pointer circling the evidence, and the death certificate predates this signature by half a year of eliminating any possibility of authenticity. The real unraveling began during the environmental engineer's report, which detailed how Karen's unauthorized land alterations had disrupted the creek's natural ecosystem, unable to contain herself. Karen launched into a tirade, interrupting witnesses and accusing the entire panel of conspiracy. "This is fake news and paid testimony," she shouted, ignoring the commission chair's repeated warnings. "They're lying to protect that illegal contractor." But the fatal blow didn't come from me, it came from inside her own camp. A representative from the HOA's management company stepped forward, confirming what many had suspected. They were terminating Willowbrook's contract effective immediately. "We've uncovered unauthorized legal fee assessments, misappropriated funds, and serious fiduciary breaches," the rep stated. "Mrs. Whitmore has been diverting association money for her personal lawsuits without board consent." That was the end. Karen exploded. She seized the microphone, shrieking accusations about conspiracies and corrupt officials until security physically escorted her from the room. Her exit, a storm of fury and humiliation, marked the spectacular collapse of her suburban reign. The commission's ruling was unanimous and uncompromising. Willowbrook Estates HOA Incorporation was declared fraudulent and null. Every fine, every lien, every enforcement action invalidated. Environmental restoration was ordered immediately. Criminal referrals would be sent to the district attorney. Outside, Sarah Morgan caught me for an interview while Karen tried to hijack the camera crew, ranting incoherently about veteran conspiracies and political corruption. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Calm accountability versus unhinged collapse. The fallout was instantaneous. Every homeowner fined or bullied by the fake HOA had their debts erased. Families who'd been terrorized became eligible for restitution. Brad was suspended from his county post pending investigation. And the neighborhood, long divided by fear, finally erupted in celebration. Mrs. Patterson organized a spontaneous cookout right there in the cul-de-sac, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and poetic justice. Karen's suburban tyranny had lasted exactly one public hearing, longer than fate would allow. And best of all, this was only the beginning of her downfall. That night, the county commission chamber still buzzed with the thrill of long-awaited justice. It was standing room only, cameras flashing, voices echoing. Sarah Morgan's article, "HOA Fraud: How One Couple Terrorized a Neighborhood," went live online that morning, detonating across the internet like a well-aimed truth bomb. A representative from the district attorney's office sat quietly in the front row, notepad ready, prepared to record anything that might strengthen the growing criminal case. Local news crews lined the back of the room, cameras aimed and waiting to capture what most suspected would be Karen's final act on the public stage. She made her entrance fashionably late, as if this were a gala rather than a legal proceeding, accompanied by a high-priced consultant seemingly hired to give her fraud a professional polish. Her PowerPoint presentation, that centered on property rights and family values, might have been comical if it weren't so tragically desperate. Her once loyal following had dwindled to just 3 nervous supporters, sitting in the front row like passengers clinging to the railing of a sinking ship. Everyone else in Willowbrook had either joined our side or found excuses to avoid the spectacle entirely. The commission, now facing a tangled web of fraud, environmental violations, and potential political fallout, understood the stakes. Mishandling this case could end careers. Karen opened the hearing with a dramatic performance worthy of a community theater award. She tearfully warned that my workshop endangered neighborhood children, flashing photos of my equipment as though they were crime scene evidence. She demanded that the commission protect hardworking families by overriding environmental protections. "This veteran," she said, pointing toward me like I carried a contagion, "has brought radical outsiders and predatory lawyers to destroy the values that make Willowbrook safe for children." The irony was staggering. The same woman who'd forged a dead man's signature, now lecturing about moral integrity. When it was my turn, I kept my tone measured and precise. I presented documents in strict chronological order. The original 1940s property deed, predating Karen's entire subdivision, blueprints from the 1970s construction era, and the 2009 environmental study that explicitly excluded my land for flood protection purposes. Then, I revealed the smoking gun, the 2010 fraudulent incorporation papers, complete with forged signatures, proving that Karen and Brad had knowingly violated federal law for personal profit. The witness lineup unfolded like a carefully orchestrated case study in truth. Mrs. Patterson's recordings filled the room with Karen's own words admitting to targeting working-class families. A licensed surveyor demonstrated boundary lines with professional instruments, dismantling Karen's fabricated claims in seconds. An environmental engineer explained, with scientific clarity, how Karen's unauthorized modifications increased flood risk for the entire neighborhood. Former county planner Mr. Williams described Brad's intimidation tactics with the exhausted tone of someone long disillusioned by corruption. Then came the moment that sealed everything. John unveiled the original subdivision developers agreement from 2010 signed by both Karen and Brad. That explicitly confirmed my property's exclusion from the HOA's jurisdiction. Ladies and gentlemen, John said, holding the document aloft like courtroom evidence in a crime drama. This proves they knew the exclusion was deliberate and lawful. Everything that followed was intentional fraud. Karen's composure finally disintegrated. She leapt to her feet, shouting over the testimony, "They're lying. This is all a setup," she screamed, hurling accusations at the commission. "You're all paid off by outsiders." Ignoring the gavel's pounding, she snatched the microphone and ranted about conspiracies and radical agendas destroying American neighborhoods. The meltdown was total, a surreal mixture of hysteria and arrogance, until security guards gently but firmly escorted her from the chamber as she shouted threats at her traitor neighbors. The commission's ruling came swiftly and decisively. Willowbrook Estates HOA Incorporation was declared fraudulent and void. All enforcement actions against excluded properties were overturned. Environmental restoration was ordered immediately, and multiple criminal referrals were sent to the district attorney's office. Outside, the contrast was stark. Sarah Morgan's camera captured my calm statement. "Sometimes standing up to bullies protects everyone who can't fight back." Emma appeared beside me, her quiet pride shining through. A moment more meaningful than any medal I'd ever earned. Karen, meanwhile, tried to hold her own impromptu interview. What came out was incoherent, rambling claims about government conspiracies, corrupt officials, and radical lawyers destroying America. The footage went viral within hours, sealing her reputation as the unhinged HOA tyrant who unraveled on live TV. The aftermath spread through Willowbrook like a carefully timed detonation. All HOA fines and liens were erased. Families who'd been bullied became eligible for restitution. Brad was suspended from his county position and faced looming criminal charges. That evening, the neighborhood gathered in spontaneous celebration. Mrs. Patterson organized a barbecue, and the scent of charcoal and vindication drifted through the air. The creek that had once divided us now flowed peacefully past Karen's house, where for sale signs sprouted before the week was out. But the sweetest moment came when Emma hugged me outside the courthouse and whispered, "Dad, you didn't just win, you saved everyone." Sometimes, she was right, sometimes the good guys do win. And sometimes, the whole world gets to watch it happen live. 6 months later, justice delivered its final verdict, a metallic snap of handcuffs and the silent seizure of bank accounts. Karen and Brad were both charged with a laundry list of felonies: fraud, conspiracy, harassment, forgery, and abuse of power. It read like a masterclass in suburban corruption finally brought to light. The district attorney, fueled by overwhelming evidence and public outrage, pursued the harshest penalties possible, ones that would send shockwaves through whole boards across the state. Karen's plea deal read like poetic justice: 18 months of probation, full restitution to every family she had tormented, mandatory community service cleaning the same creek she once tried to destroy, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board. Brad's downfall was equally fitting. He lost his county job, faced the revocation of his professional license, and watched his construction company crumble as clients abandoned him faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. My own countersuit ended rather favorably. Let's just say Emma's college fund jumped from community college range to a university she dreams of. 3 other families received enough compensation to end years of emotional damage and forced property alterations. But the greatest victory wasn't financial, it was watching Willowbrook evolve from a neighborhood of suspicion into a genuine community. We restructured ourselves as the Willowbrook Neighbors Association, a voluntary organization with Mrs. Patterson unanimously elected as president. Her first act, founding the annual Willow Creek Environmental Festival, where families now celebrate conservation instead of obsessing over lawn heights. My workshop became the heart of the neighborhood, a cozy hub where the scent of coffee mixes with sawdust and laughter. It's where we plan charity events, organize youth baseball teams, and host monthly potlucks that would have driven Karen into a nervous breakdown. Emma loves having her friends over. The sound of their laughter fills spaces that once echoed with tension and fear. The environmental recovery surpassed every expectation. For the first time in decades, great blue herons returned to the creek, their haunting calls replacing Karen's endless complaints. River otters splash in the clear water again, and kingfishers dive freely for fish thriving without chemical runoff from manicured lawns. The ripple effect spread beyond our borders. Sarah Morgan's reporting uncovered a dozen other fraudulent HOA incorporations across 3 states. That investigation inspired new legislation appropriately named the Willowbrook Act, requiring independent oversight for all new HOA formations and full financial transparency for existing ones. Attorney Jana now specializes in HOA fraud, using our case as a blueprint to help other communities escape miniature dictatorships. Veterans groups even teach our legal approach in workshops titled Defeating Domestic Tyrants, with clipboards. My favorite result, though, is seeing Emma's confidence bloom. She's testified at state legislative hearings on HOA reform, with the poise of someone who learned early that courage protects not just oneself, but everyone who can't fight back. As for Karen, her ending was everything justice could offer. The bank repossessed her McMansion. Brad divorced her to dodge the scandal, and she now lives in a cramped apartment where no one measures her grass or checks her garbage schedule. Occasionally, someone spots her driving through the old neighborhood, but she never stops, probably afraid we'd all come out to wave today. The Willowbrook Creek Environmental Scholarship helps local students pursue degrees in conservation law funded by the settlement Mo. Nay Karen unknowingly provided through her crimes. Our annual Property Rights Day festival draws families from across 5 counties, celebrating communities built on cooperation, not control. Mrs. Patterson recently finished her neighborhood history book, closing with a chapter titled How One Tyrant United 50 Families Against Suburban Fascism. It's now required reading for anyone thinking of joining an HOA board in our county. Just last month, a homeowner from Arizona reached out about similar HOA harassment. Emma's idea: launch a nonprofit to help victims fight back using our proven methods. The Free the Neighborhoods Foundation will debut next spring, but that's a story for another episode. Right now, I'm watching the sunset paint the creek in gold as Emma and her friends build rope swing, something that would have violated 17 of Karen's imaginary rules. The air, once thick with threats and hostility, now hums with laughter, music, and the sound of real community. This is what America should sound like. Kids laughing, neighbors helping each other, and not a single soul measuring grass with a ruler. Your turn. Share your wildest HOA horror stories in the comments. Have you ever faced down a neighborhood tyrant? I read every one and love hearing how others stood their ground. Spread this story to anyone dealing with HOA bullies, because knowledge is power, and tyrants only win when good people stay silent. Hit that subscribe button for more HOA stories. We're exposing petty dictators and celebrating the communities that fight back. Sadly, there's never a shortage of Karens who need reminding that property rights always outweigh personal ego. Next week's episode: how a retired teacher dismantled an HOA by proving the president embezzled $200,000 in landscaping fees. Trust me, you won't want to miss that takedown. Remember, the best defense against neighborhood tyrants is refusing to be intimidated by people whose only weapons are clipboards and bad attitudes. That's a wrap for today's episode of HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma deliver justice, smash that like button, drop your thoughts below, and subscribe so you won't miss the next glorious HOA meltdown.